Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ari Kornhaber and I will be your moderator for this webinar session. Today we will be covering COVID-19 relief programs, legal industry's claim to restitution. Some of the topics we will be discussing today include the new eligibility rules for the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and second draw loans. We're also going to be discussing best practices for PPP loan forgiveness applications. We're going to talk about the intersection of employee retention credits and EIDLs, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and other sources of COVID relief. Today, we are honored to have an incredible panel of experts, thought leaders, true subject matter experts, including Sean Flaherty, the managing partner of the Catches Law Firm, Lou Gazillo, CPA and partner at Grassi Accounting, and Michael Dicaprio, senior vice president and CFO at Esquire Bank. Let's get started. Let's sort of go around the horn here and just do a quick introduction. Let's start with you, Michael Dicaprio, and we'll go from there.
Let me take myself off mute. Great. Ari, thanks for the introduction. I mean, to expand on that, I was responsible for the setting up and managing of the bank's PPP processes, which included applying to become an SBA lender, selecting our software provider, and automating our process, as well as developing, implementing, and managing our PPP loan and forgiveness processes. I'm also the bank's resource on the CARES Act federal legislation, as well as related PPP rules. I was also very involved with our customer base, explaining the nuances of the government program and assisting in their decision-making throughout the life cycle of these loans.
Thank you for that. That was an in-depth introduction. I hope you saved something for the body of the webinar. Lou, would you introduce yourself a little more, please?
Sure, I'm Lou Pizzoleo, and Ari stumbled a little bit on that, and I would probably stumble a little bit on his last name as well. So I've lived with that for 40 some odd years at this point. So anyway, we're a year into this. About a year ago today, I was starting to tear through the CARES Act and, follow every change in a manic fashion. So much so that we started doing webinars, and the space that I'm in today was an unfinished shed a year ago. So a lot has changed, and PPP has been a great help for a lot of businesses. We've helped 1,000+ borrowers at Grassi, and that continues on today, both from an application to secure the loan and other stimulus, and consultation and assistance with the forgiveness process. As you know, the changes have caused a lot of drama, and what's encouraging is it took a little while, but the point at which we're today, I think, is very close to the legislative intent of the program, and that's encouraging. And I think, this round 2, which is set to expire on the 31st, likely will get extended out a bit because both the regulators and the financial institutions, as well as the borrowers, have had their hands full for the past few months, and likely all the money hasn't gone out yet in this round 2. So there's been a little bit of discussion about it. There's a proposal in right now. It's certainly hasn't passed, but it's likely we're going to see that deadline extended out at least another quarter, maybe longer. So that's all I'll say for now, because I can go on forever. But let me turn it over to Sean.
Yeah, we'll give you that opportunity, and thank you. That was kind of some breaking news there. And before Sean jumps in, I just want to thank you, Lou, and thank you, Michael. When attorneys walk into the courtroom to try their case, they have their team of experts so that they could achieve justice for their clients. It's great to have experts like you, Lou, and you, Michael, here, so that lawyers, when they're talking about running their law firm like a business, also have access to the experts they need to be successful in that regard as well. So, we have a lot of attorneys who have joined us on this webinar today, and it's really important to have that managing partner perspective. So, Sean, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us today. Please
Well, thank you all for having me and inviting me and so forth. So I'm Sean Flaherty. I'm the managing partner of Ketch's Law Group in Boston. We are the largest personal injury firm in New England, and I guess I bring some perspective today, as in I guess 3 parts. One, my job as an attorney, which I still practice myself and try to stumble my way into the courtroom, and my job as the managing partner and CEO of this organization, and my job, interplaying, and it really became super necessary for the first time since I've been managing partner and CEO, is dealing with my bank and dealing with the accountants on a regular basis during this time. We were approved for the PPP April 6, 2020. We were forgiven on December 11th, 2020. And during that stretch of time, the connection that I needed and the great people, some of them on this call here today, and were people that I relied on intensively. And I can only say, as a managing partner, whether you're a large firm or a small firm, having resources like Lou Pizzoleo, like Ari, like Esquire Bank, it's something that you can't put a monetary value on it. So it's become more and more necessary, and I think that it's incumbent upon all practitioners to have that. So I guess I'm happy to be here today, and I'm happy to take any and all questions that may result. Thank you.
Terrific. So yeah, we're going to get into best practices. We're going to get into some of the complexities dealing with these issues at hand. I think maybe the best way to sort of frame the conversation from this point forward is to talk about some of the key differences between PPP rounds 1 and 2, especially hearing from Lou just moments ago that we could expect round 2 to be extended. So Michael, maybe you were somebody who was actually a PPP lender. So you went through the process, as you said in your introduction, of getting the technology and everything in place to provide the loans. Maybe you could just share with the audience the key differences between rounds 1 and 2.
Sure. Thanks, Ari. So there are 2 key differences that I'd point out that I think are major. One is, to get a second PPP loan, you need to pass this 25% revenue test. And what this is in order for a borrower to be eligible for a second draw loan, they need to be able to demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross receipts in any calendar quarter in 2020 as compared to the prior year quarter. So this is a new requirement, and it's something that it's a bar that needs to be met, an incremental bar that needs to be met in order to get another PPP loan. Now, there's a lot of questions on how to define gross receipts. And I'd say one helpful hint there is look to your tax return for the mapping, as the SBA has issued prescriptive guidance on how to map your tax return line items to what they describe or they believe constitutes gross receipts. So that's a key test there. I'd pause there. Lou, do you want to add anything as it relates to the 25% test?
Yeah, I was going to jump in because this requirement, like you said, what's gross receipts? It did cause a bit of stress in the early days before guidance was out, because as we did in round 1, we sort of launched the plane while we were still building the engine. So in the early days of round 2 in early January, people were sort of still reeling on, okay, well, how do I measure this? And, what came through even after the prescriptive guidance is, as long as you're consistent on both sides of this, whether you use your accounting-based revenue or whether you use your tax-based gross receipts, you just want to use the same method of calculation on both sides so that you're not manipulating the calculation. One of the positive things out of this, which really wasn't anticipated until some new FAQ guidance came out last week, is what this does is take all the drama around the certification that ensued last spring. And that's that certification that the economic uncertainty causes you to need the loan. And that sort of subjective judgment that you had to make in good faith. And then if your loan was over $2 million, you have to prove it. This requirement now takes that away. What the SBA said in a recent revised FAQ was that if you have the revenue reduction, we will, your good faith certification is safe harbored. So it's no longer this sort of squishy subjective judgment. It's objective. Granted, there's still some room for judgment around measurement of gross receipts, but if you've met that, you've made that certification in good faith. That was huge. Nobody's really focused on it all that much because it just came out late last week. But I could tell you in working with a bunch of nervous entrepreneurs over the past 6 months when they're filing for forgiveness and waiting for this loan necessity questionnaire that's been put forth that asks all types of questions about your business and what happened afterwards. It's a real relief, I think, in round two. And I'll go on one more second. You know, I had a lot of conversations with entrepreneurs in early and late January that said, yeah, you know, we had a bad quarter. Our second quarter of 2020 was down, but the rest of the year we sort of recovered and I'm sitting on a pile of cash and, you know, I don't know if I can make that certification. And I think you still have to go through that thought process, but this piece of guidance changes that a bit. I think, you know, for folks who were on the border there, I think you have a little bit more evidence now that, you know, might make you more confident in going for the loan and then going for forgiveness thereafter. I'm sure you're going to get into it, but you know, PPP2 was geared to, or intended to be geared to the smaller borrowers. So they changed the employee count from less than 500 to less than 300 for round two. The other thing they did, which caused a lot of bad press and headlines, is, you know, specifically exclude public companies, a bunch of other companies that made press. And then they got rid of the alternate sizing standard. So in round one, you had to have less than 500 employees, or you could qualify if you met the previously existing SBA alternative sizing guidance, which was based on net equity, net worth. And there were some big companies that had a lot more than 500 employees that got in that way. So they did away with that. So they sort of cleaned up things a bit.
Great. And Michael, I want to go back to you for some more key differences between round one and two. But Sean, Lou was just talking about, you know, an example of having one quarter compared to the same quarter the year before down, but the rest of the year not being down. What's your take on that? Because I know your law firm experienced something similar.
Yeah, and I think that that's happened throughout the industry within legal, and it's happened, if you think about it, for a long time within the contingency practice with legal, where the difference between a great year and an okay year is one or two cases going the right way, or the difference between, you know, a wonderful year and a horrible year is 4 cases going the right way in a lot of the practices that we see and that we're into. And I think what's important from listening to the experts here is that you really need to gain some expertise. Get with your bank, get with your accountant, because you could in fact qualify without knowing it, depending on when things occurred in 2019 and when they occurred in 2020. And, you know, I don't know, this is more an expert question, but do you need to have it line up precisely, Lou or Mike, with regards to the exact time frame from 2019 to 2020 for that 25% deficit?
Yeah, so the measurement is calendar quarters. So it has to be, you know, your let's say your second quarter of 2020 versus your comparable quarter in 2019, your second quarter of 2019. There's some exceptions for new businesses or seasonal businesses where you can look at the trailing quarter. There's some folks who really, Sean, like yourself, in opening a new office in early January, they really set the timing on fire and they started a new business in January of 2020. Imagine that. Imagine you just went into business in February of 2020. For those folks, the baseline measurement is actually that first quarter of 2020, and then you would look at the rest of the year against that. So there's some exceptions like that for unique circumstances, but in general, it's your 2020 quarters versus your 2019 comparable quarter.
Right, and that's exact. So first quarter 2019 to first quarter 2020.
Calendar quarters.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing, I don't want to steal too much fanfare from PPP because it does get all the headlines and it's, you know, a huge program. But, you know, for those folks who maybe didn't feel they can make the certification or for whatever reason weren't chasing the PPP loan, the employee retention credit has been a huge, tax credit, refundable payroll tax credit and payroll subsidy that, again, probably should be getting as many headlines as PPP, but it's a lesser known program. And late in December, there's been so many rounds of the stimulus bills, but in one of the rounds that passed in late December, they changed that program to allow PPP borrowers who were explicitly excluded from using the employee retention credit to now being allowed to use it. So if you had a partial closure or a full closure or some kind of reduction in revenue, that's a program you should be looking at with your, any of your advisors. Obviously your CPA, but if you're in a PEO or you're working with a good payroll provider, they could sort of help guide you through it as well.
Excellent. I know that is a topic that's sort of gaining interest more and more every day. We're receiving calls about it. So, Michael, I'd like to sort of put a bow on the comparison between round one and round two as we move forward. Anything else you wanted to comment about that?
Sure. There'd be one more thing I'd want to highlight. And that's, there has been enhanced scrutiny by the SBA over the application process. Whereas in the first round, the SBA immediately approved loans after lender submission. It was instantaneous. Now, that's not really the case for round two. The SBA is performing its own systematic reviews, which can take up to a number of weeks, to be honest with you. And it appears the SBA, they're reconciling company and owner information applied to various government databases, whether it be the IRS, SBA, criminal, bankruptcy databases that are publicly available to validate your assertion. So one thing I'd say is when you are completing the application, you need to make sure that they're accurate because we'll get kicked back. Typical things we've seen, the application for PPP1 didn't agree to PPP2. That's been flagged. Tax ID numbers wrong, tax entities wrong. If owners had historical bankruptcies, these things are being caught and flagged up front and having to be evaluated. So that's another item I'd point out as far as differences.
I'll say, the bank's platforms are much improved, one versus two. I think in round one, the banks were trying to sort of race to get the platforms up and running, and lots of folks experienced clunkiness or getting kicked off or not being able to get on. I think that's gone away. Most folks have been able to get on their platform and submit an application. But like you said, Michael, the SBA is doing their due diligence, and we've seen some clients wait up to 6 weeks to get funded. People get nervous, especially now we're in March and the 31st is upon us. Folks are nervous. They want to know that they're approved and the funding's coming. So that's another sort of, tip or sort of tea leaves that, it's likely this thing will get pushed out past the 31st, but who knows?
Terrific. So let's go to a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time from the registrants. One says, we included employees but not partner income for first round funding. Is there an option to get funds not included in the first draw? Put it up to, I guess, Lou, you want to start off on that?
Yeah, so there's two things going on, and you may or may not want to open the can of worms, but when they introduced PPP2, there was a mechanism to go back and sort of get additional funds that you were entitled to in round one if you chose to and if your bank let you. So it's a little bit tenuous. In practice, I really haven't seen anybody do it. I think it was more for borrowers who maybe missed the program and are going to go and apply the first time. That's why PPP1 was reopened, because you can't be a PPP2 borrower unless you were a one borrower and used all the money. So it sort of required them to reopen one. So while there's a mechanism to go backwards, I will say, let's say you take that off the table. In round two, you can use that payroll, and there's some specifically different caps than for an employee, both in the cash comp and around how you consider healthcare. But you don't necessarily need to use the same data you used in round one. If you use the same bank, I would encourage you to dialogue with the banker before you submit, because it's going to sort of leave this sort of question mark of why it would be larger than the first round. If you're on a different lender's platform, you may still want to bring it up, but it's probably less critical.
Great. Thank you for that. Another question from the audience. My second PPP was denied, even though I retained all the employees. What are my options, as they didn't give me any reasons? Michael, you want to address that one?
Sure. Well, the first thing, I mean, it's all facts and circumstances, but we would really have to understand your facts. But I mean, if to the extent that you qualified for round one, I don't really see a reason why you wouldn't qualify for round two if you meet those requirements we discussed earlier, as far as number of employees and the like.
Excellent. So, Michael, sticking with you at the moment, could you share with the audience some of the best practices that you've seen, that you've obtained by law firms in assessing and getting access to PPP funding, please?
Sure. It's actually an item that I think Sean touched on lightly before. First and foremost, use your accounting professionals. I've observed that typically accounting departments at law firms either don't have the bandwidth to take on incremental work or the expertise to deal with complex payroll, accounting, and tax matters. These applications are both complex and time-consuming, and it would be my recommendation that you leverage your external accounting resources that specialize in this. The law firms that have, they've been most efficient and effective throughout the process. I don't know, Lou, if you could add some value on what you've seen on your end, but what you guys did for special, but it works.
I completely agree. Obviously, it's a little bit biased, but one of the things I've been saying throughout the whole crisis is, when you're an entrepreneur, you're an owner operator in a moment of crisis. I sort of experienced this. Look, I'm a shareholder in Grassi, so early in March, I became manic about, just making sure our business survived. I mean, every day I felt like I was going to war. And, just from a mental health standpoint, talking to your advisors, the circle of people that help you work on your business when you're not working in it, whoever that is, your wife, your mother-in-law, your cousin, whoever that may be. And usually attorneys and accountants fall into that circle, bankers as well. It's important as an owner operator to sort of rally your team, and it helps you get perspective when you're kind of going to war every day. It was a tough time. I mean, it seems like, more than 12 months ago at this point, but I remember early March. I mean, I think we were all scared. We didn't know what to do.
I don't want to cut Lou off, but I can absolutely. A friend of mine sent me a text the other day, and he said, a year ago on Sunday, I spoke in front of a crowd of people, and he remembered the speech and said, it feels like it was a lot longer than a year ago this last Sunday, 2 days ago. And I said, it was a dog year, my friend. It was a one calendar year, but it took 7 years off my life. I can tell you that much. And you're right. I think in times like
your hairline.
Yeah, in times like these, maybe it's because I have a new puppy. In times like these, those days, they dragged on forever. Right. I mean, it was a battle to get through. It was our modern day, potential collapse. And if you're in business, whether you're a great bank, a great accounting firm, a great law firm, it doesn't matter. You're in business, you're worried, you're scared, because you don't know for the first time in a while what tomorrow really is going to bring. And we all, I think, had moments of unsure, unrest, sleepless nights, and so forth. And I think more than ever during that period of time and ongoing, it's the people that you lean on and that were probably also going through the same things that you were, that you gain the most knowledge and trust from.
Yeah, it's a great point. I remember, like Michael said, Esquire Bank became SBA approved for the purposes of providing PPP loans to our clients and law firms around the country, and just following the way round one developed. I mean, the night before they issued the oxymoron, the interim final rules. And that just didn't make sense to me. How could they both be interim and final rules at the same time? And then they opened up the gate and it was first come, first serve, which led to a lot of frustration and anarchy. But obviously, like we said, round two, they learned a lot and has gone better. And just leveraging that team of people. I know, Michael, you think it's also important. It seems obvious, but maybe you could expand on the role of the payroll provider, and while you're considering your headcount and salary reductions, how that all plays together.
Sure, thanks. First, I'd want to touch on headcount and salary reductions. Another best practice. When you're thinking through applying for your loan, you should also think through the timing of any sort of restructurings in your workforce. Why? Because the intent of the payroll protection program is to keep folks employed. And the level of the forgiveness is contingent on holding staffing and comp levels pretty steady. And therefore, if you intend to restructure, it may make sense to hold off on these changes till you get outside that 2 to 6 month covered period window after your loan funding, as that's really what you're going to be judged on when it comes down to forgiveness.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here because there's sort of a nuance in the loan forgiveness that's come up in the beginning when they first released the application. We actually asked the SBA about it even, prior to any applications going in. But at this point, we're confirmed with the answer and have seen some loans get forgiven this way. And not too many people are focused on it. So early on, everybody was focused on this FTE penalty and the pay rate reduction penalty and how to manage the workforce. And it was very impactful until the Flex Act passed in June, and they made the covered period up to 24 weeks. So you're getting lent based, the loan size is set off of 10 weeks of payroll, but you now have 24 weeks to measure what you spend. So the way the application works mechanically is, let's say you have a $5 million loan. If you spend $10 million over 24 weeks, and let's just say, for instance, you reduced your workforce by half and your FTE factor was 50%, you'd still achieve full forgiveness of the loan. And we haven't seen any, any anecdotal patterns that actually are that severe. Usually you'll see it 90% or 80% or 75%. And you just go a couple more weeks out because now your spend is more than your loan amount, you still achieve full forgiveness. So definitely something to look at and monitor. You don't want to do a big riff right after you take the loan, but much less impactful. And then the other thing that many borrowers weren't focused on is, there was a ton of safe harbors there for voluntary terminations, terminations for cause, people who you may have riffed and then offered them their job back, but they don't want to come back because unemployment is so rich. What we're seeing, and it's over a pretty large population of borrowers, is it's really hard to not achieve full forgiveness. I think certainly in the restaurant industry, they're more impactful there. If your facility was closed, hospitality as well, retail. If you were closed and you didn't spend the money, it's difficult. But if you were operating and you spent the money, even if it's over 16 weeks, and they also expanded the types of expenses late in December. There's 4 new categories of expenses that you can include. So I think at the point we're at, it's really difficult to call this thing a loan. It was always a grant disguised as a loan. They put this program out through the 7A program because it existed and it was the quickest way to get the money out. But it was always intended to be a grant. So that's when I started off and I was talking about how we got back to the legislative intent. It's been fun to sort of watch the minute-to-minute change to get there, the political infighting. It's the first time in my career my wife would come in after watching news and say, "Hey, here, look, isn't this what you're working on?" So it was really all-consuming. But and we've seen it help a lot of borrowers. I mean, I have it was a new client during PPP. They were in the retail merchandising space, and they made a huge pivot. Their business basically went away almost overnight, but they pivoted and went into the manufacturing of PPE, face masks, shields for the local, healthcare workers and the community. They kept their workforce employed. They managed to keep the business afloat. And they did that because they got PPP money. It allowed them to take a little more risk than if they didn't get it. They probably would have laid everybody off and laid low until it came back. So, watching the program actually have real impact on entrepreneurs and generational businesses that have been around for forever. And even being part of helping sort of grease the wheels, if you will. It's been fun, humbling, and a bit exhausting. But I think we probably still have another 12 to 18 months of this tail, of seeing stimulus continue to go out.
Sean, when I listen to Lou talking about retail, restaurants, hospitality, that makes all the sense in the world. More than anyone on this call that being a contingency fee law firm is just, it's a unicorn. There's no other business quite like it. Could you talk to some of the challenges surrounding these issues? Because, the cases that you were working on last year were cases that you signed up in years past. So when you're talking about this year's revenue, an interruption in cash flow, stay-at-home orders and intakes down, could you talk about how that all plays into this, please?
Sure. So you're right. The firm that I run is its own unicorn, and there are many people watching today that are also, on their own unicorn. That's exactly a good way to put it. Essentially, for a large majority of the people that I speak to on a regular basis, which happens to be people that do the same thing I do, all the way from Philadelphia, Florida, California, I think in general, we're all in the same boat. And that is that a lot of the work that is done on these files, and a lot of the cases that come into the law firm, in any law firm, they're there for anywhere between 24 and 34 months on average. So that means that the fees that are coming into my law firm today, those are fees that generated to the law firm today, but the case came into the law firm in 2017, 2018. Now, I say that because that becomes a real issue in 2020, 21, 2022, when we had a stretch in time in March, April, May, June of 2020 during the heart of COVID, where automobile accidents dropped by almost 92% in some counties in Massachusetts. Again, we touched upon it, but it wasn't that long ago where people weren't not only not going to restaurants, they weren't getting in their car to go to the food store. We had times in which people weren't leaving their homes, not for days, not for weeks, but for months. We had people that were just shutter in place. When that happens, like any other business, you feel that immediate impact on what feeds your business. Now, if you're in a restaurant, what feeds your business is those potential patrons coming into your restaurant, eating and paying their tab. Well, when you're in a contingency fee business, like we are, and like Esquire Bank specializes in dealing with, that person paying their tab is that person that's coming to you because they were injured in that automobile accident, or they were injured at work, or they've been a victim of, any number of contingency fee, medical malpractice, whatever the case may be. When that flow of business stops, it's going to be felt somewhere. And it's going to be felt in the years to come. And I think for a large majority of people, what I'm hearing that do contingency work is that the unsurety of 2021 and 2022 is going to be based on the intakes and the new cases that were down in the last calendar year, in the last 12 months. And I guess I'd put that back onto Lou and to Mike is we're seeing round one and round two, and albeit I think the majority of businesses are having their downtime and their down inventory now, but there are businesses like mine where we're going to feel it now because courts aren't open still in Boston. And we're going to feel it later because cases weren't occurring and overall revenue is going to suffer in the years to come. And have you heard of other businesses that are going to be suffering like this, enough so that that Congress and the Senate look to pass part maybe 3 or 4 of this type of bill?
I mean, the stimulus pen seems to be full of ink, so I'd be shocked if we don't see, some other round. The only thing I will say is as time has gone on, we've seen it become more and more focused on the smaller borrowers and not the big borrowers. That said, another business that functions in a somewhat similar fashion, although completely different context, is the construction industry. You got a great deal of backlog, you work through the backlog. There's no new bookings for a few years, you're going to feel that later. So it's a cash flow pinch, and it becomes how do you sort of survive the the cash flow dip, you know, and you want to make sure you have good internal finance staff so that you're doing the cash flow right and you're managing your variable expenses correctly. You know, that's the one, let's say, benefit of what's gone on the past few years, or what's gone on the past year or so is I think most professional services firms and a lot of businesses, they've seen that middle variable cost just go away. So if revenue stayed about the same, or even if it dipped a bit, a lot of businesses in the professional services suite and other related businesses, you've seen the middle go away. Yeah, payroll's somewhat fixed, but all the T&E and, you know, there's a ton of cost savings that I think have been picked up. Once things get turned back on, that's going to get eaten up quick, and cash flow is going to be a pinch. So you want to make sure you're, doing your forecasting, paying attention, and then sort of leaning on your sources of financing. One of the things we didn't cover, and I'm giving it sort of a long introduction, but other than traditional bank financing, there's another program which you all probably heard of called the EIDL loans. It's the economic injury disaster loans. Direct through the SBA. So you go on the SBA's website and apply. It's a, relatively inexpensive cost of capital and a long amortization. I mean, you're talking about a 30-year amortization and a 3.75 loan. They're traditionally underwritten and there are some limitations on them, but they typically model the loan to be about 4 to 6 months of cash flow. So if you feel yourself as an owner operator in a pinch, and you think you're going to need some additional sort of some weight to get through the dip in the cash flows, that's another place that you might want to look.
Excellent. Want to check in with the audience. We have some other questions that have come in. Maybe Michael, you could take this one. What documents do solo practitioners need for a second PPP loan?
Lou, do you want to take this one? I don't know off the top of my head.
Sure. So depending on how you're set up, and the new Biden rules, as they call them, it's another one of those revisions to the revision of the interim final rule. Changes this a little bit, but ultimately it comes off if you have income going into a Schedule C. It was originally your income from your Schedule C. Now it's driven off of your gross receipts. If you have some payroll, it goes up from there. But there are specific caps as well for sole proprietors, but very similar to the other caps. But yeah, you want to get your tax return in hand, and you're going to work from there.
Yeah, I'd say to echo what Lou said, the key document is your tax return for sole practitioners, your Schedule C. That'll be the key driver.
Michael, you've spoken multiple times about contemporaneous records and keeping your documents in real time, whether it's for the application, for the forgiveness, and document retention, how important that is. Maybe you could expand on that for the audience.
Sure. Well, one key matter I just wanted to raise and make sure folks are aware of, after your loan is funded and subsequently forgiven, your obligations actually don't end there. The SBA can elect to review or audit your loan documentation for a period of up to 6 years. So it's really important that you have documentation supporting the loan amount, the forgiveness, as well as all those certifications that you're making in these applications. It's going to be critical because it's not your bank's responsibility, your lender's responsibility to retain all this information. It really is going to be placed on you, right? So you may now segue into the streamlining of the document of forgiveness. Currently, there's new streamlined requirements for loans for $150,000 and under. For these loans, now all you have to submit is one piece of paper certifying that you qualify for forgiveness and do not need to provide incremental support to your lender. However, that doesn't obviate you for the responsibility of collecting all this documentation and having it ready in case the SBA picks you for a review.
I'm living this right now, and we were given this counsel from the beginning about contemporaneous documentation, really specific around the certification of economic need. And, one thing that rings true is, Sean's dog years thought. You try to write a memo a year later about where your head was at, especially in this year, it's not easy. So we're kind of living through that, helping some clients that maybe didn't take our first, or second nudge to put this down on paper, and we're doing it now, and it's hard. So, sooner rather than later. And then the other thing I'll say is, we've seen several times the SBA ask explicitly in the review process there's a bunch of documents that are listed on the application for forgiveness that you don't have to submit to the bank, but you're required to maintain. And their request is, show us the documents that you're not required to submit, but that you have to maintain. And it's not one or two, it's the whole list. They want to see everything. Yeah. They want you to pull your file out and hand it to them. So yeah, you're really in the best position to do that before they ask, even maybe before you file for forgiveness. It'll just take the stress and aggravation out of it. Now, fast forward 5 years from now or 6 years from now and think about how difficult it might be.
Michael, this one could be easy for you. When will the streamline forgiveness process be in place for PPP loans under $150,000?
Sure. Well, the streamline requirements are actually in place now, and I was just referencing them. I mean, to be clear, applications now for $150,000 loans for less than $150,000 or less. It's a one-page application where you write in the amount you believe you qualify for forgiveness, and then there are a number of certifications that you need to initial and then you sign, right? So those supplemental documentation is required to be reviewed by the bank. It'll be once the bank gets that information, it'll be sent right on to the SBA, and then they go through their review process before the loan's forgiven. However, like I had said, the borrower is still required to accumulate all the documentation that they're required to accumulate supporting their application. So you can't lose sight of that.
Sean, back to you, because we have dozens of managing partners of contingency fee law firms watching this live today, and this is going to be shared with many more than that. And I was noticing some of the polling questions and the answers. When you look to the long-term plan, because obviously PPP was a great short-term financial solution. You talked about intakes being down, an impending cash flow interruption. You told me before this webinar that you're not going to be able to try a case maybe until 2023. So what are some of the things that trial lawyers could become educated on to help their liquidity as they try to not only survive this, but thrive throughout this?
I think that, Ari, that's a great question. There's a couple of things that are incumbent in that must be done. One, you need to look at the cases that you have in your stock that can in fact be worked up and resolved at this point in time. And undoubtedly they're there. Whether you're a sole practitioner and you have 100 files, or you're 100 lawyers and you have 100,000 files, there's no doubt there's things within your portfolio that you are able to work on, you're able to turn over, and you're able to get great value on for your client and do your client the justice that needs to be done. The second thing that can absolutely be done is dealing with your firm's expenses on these cases. Expenses are things that a lot of law firms deal with differently, but I think we're going to see, and we should have, a real shift in people, instead of self-funding their case expenses, which in firms can be hundreds and hundreds and up to tens of millions of dollars. Those case expenses can be financed through your bank, through Esquire Bank, and it can be done, and it can save you on a number of ways. One, today's cash going out the door. If you're funding a product liability case or a mass tort or a class action or a medical malpractice claim, you're looking at $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a quarter in expenses on some of these cases. And in doing so, that's real money that could be in your firm, making payroll, making rent, doing all the things that need to be done, that could be financed, and that could save you and your law firm a lot of overhead and a lot of problems. So I think financing is massive, and I think getting through your cases and really spending time looking at them, and not just dealing, unfortunately, with all lawyers. And anybody that's watching this knows this is the case. You happen to focus your attention on what's going to court tomorrow, or what's going to mediation next week, or instead of taking a step back and looking at all of the areas of your practice and where you can put some attention that it needs it, and it's something that could get settled and could be done. And I'm sure to some extent, it makes more sense to do it that way, to deal with just what's in front of you. But you want to step back and kind of, I think, deal with what's right to be dealt with and what's right.
Terrific. Michael, you started mentioning some of the complexities observed back to the PPP applications and forgiveness. I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity to finish your thoughts there.
Sure. I mean, one thing I'd say about the complexities that I've observed, it all goes back to my comments on using your external accounting professionals. A lot of law firms think it's as easy. They'll be able to plow right through this, but that's not really the case. I mean, this application process requires a detailed understanding of your payroll records, your payroll tax filings, your income tax status, your income tax return filings, as well as those of your partners, as well as a detailed understanding of the ever-evolving SBA program rules. So I just wanted to highlight, as you're thinking through applying and forgiveness, really think through reaching out to those external accounting professionals. It really makes a huge difference.
Lou, I see you just came off mute. Did you want to add a thought there?
Yeah, I want to address a question that came up that I think we covered, but it was still in the Q&A around
Sure.
comp and going back to PPP1. So while there is a mechanism to go back to PPP1 to possibly get additional loan size that you were entitled to, but maybe didn't get in round one, it really, the application of that has been rare, and it will vary bank to bank. So I would say if you think there's an opportunity, speak with your banker first. And if you're, maybe if you don't get the answer you want, think about it for round two, and it might just be money that you left on the table. You could potentially go to another platform to capture it, but the complexity probably isn't worth the game.
I see another question came in. It may have been a question that was asked and answered. I just want to make sure we're addressing the questions that the audience took the time to submit. So for a law firm, intakes were down, but revenue was actually up last year. How does round two apply to me, if at all? Can it if revenue was actually up?
I mean, I'll take this. Like I said, if your revenue is up year over year, you really have to evaluate each quarter as compared to the prior year quarter to see if you had a down quarter. If you didn't, you'd most likely not be eligible for the second round of PPP. I don't know, Lou, what are your views on the matter?
The same, the only thing I'll say is that, Sean started talking about sort of the timing of, maybe in 2020, it was for those 2019 cases that were settling out. If you've started to see a slowdown in 2021 in your revenue, you might look to the employee retention credit. And we didn't cover them in detail, but let me just give you a 2-second overview of the retention credit. So
Lou, do it in more than 2 seconds. We have about 7 minutes left, and it's a specific question from the audience. And I think it's important enough to let's be thoughtful about this explanation, please.
Sure. So the employee retention credit, there's two programs. There's a 2020 program and a 2021 program, and they're slightly different. In 2020, if you've had either a partial closure, a full closure, or a 50% reduction in revenue, which I think is pretty severe, what we've seen is most people get by with the partial closure, then you're entitled to a payroll tax credit of 50% of the first 10,000 of FICA wages per employee. So it's essentially 5,000 per employee one time for 1 quarter in 2020. If you were a PPP borrower, you were explicitly locked out from it until the end of December. Then they changed it. So now you can be both a PPP borrower and a 2020 employee retention credit recipient. And the credit it's called a payroll tax credit, but it's more than that. It's actually a subsidy. So let's say you paid, $1,000 in FICA for an employee, but they had the amount of wages, you're still entitled to the full credit. So it's more than a tax credit. It's actually a subsidy. In 2021, I missed one part. So in 2020, if you're under 100 employees, regardless of whether you paid the people to work or not work, you're entitled to the credit. If you're over 100 employees, you actually have to pay people for not working. 2021, the requirements go down a bit, but the credit goes up. So in 2021, it's per quarter, Q1, Q2, and likely going to get extended to Q3. If you have under 500 employees, you're entitled to the credit whether they worked or didn't work. If it's over 500, they have to be paid for not working. The revenue reduction is 20%. So if your revenues are down 20% in Q1, you're entitled, and it's Q1 2021 versus your pre-COVID time, so 2019. You're entitled to a 70% credit up to the first 10,000, so 7,000 per employee per quarter. So Q1 and Q2. So if you got all of these, it's up to 19,000 per employee. And again, you can be a PPP borrower and an employee retention credit recipient. You can't double dip. So there's this mechanism of, if I'm using payroll to get PPP loan forgiveness, I have to work around that payroll to get the employee retention credit. So there's the before period, where you paid payroll over PPP caps, and then after it. So while a lot of law firms sounds like, unless there was a closure, and with courts closed, you might get there. 2020, you may not qualify, but in 2021, with the lower thresholds and the higher credit, that might be something to look to. And there's a mechanism to actually calculate and advance yourself the credit right now. So it could be another source of financing. The other thing that I should mention, and I think it's passed, but if in 2020 you had an opportunity to defer your payroll taxes for a certain period of time for 2 years, so it was like an interest-free loan, not really the best place to go and get financing. But that was another source of kind of getting through the cash flow bump. And we may see that again, where they offer something like that again. It was, don't pay your payroll taxes. You can pay them at the end of 2020 and 2021. So it was like a 2-year timeout. So we may see that again as well.
Thank you for that explanation. You mentioned interest-free loans, and it just triggers this thought in my mind. Sean, back to you, something you were talking about, how contingency fee law firms are handling their case costs, their disbursements. And as a financial service provider to the legal community, it's amazing to see still how the majority of law firms are using their law firm capital to pay for those costs. And what they're essentially doing is providing their clients with interest-free loans to cover those case costs. And they're using their after-tax dollars to do so. So just from a business perspective, that doesn't make great sense, right? And on top of that, Lou, you could verify this, they get poor tax treatment. When they're spending money on case costs, they can't treat those in the eyes of the IRS as expenses and then revenue when they get repaid. So to offset that poor treatment, contingency fee law firms have a unique opportunity, which is to finance their disbursements. And then they have the option whether or not to sort of pass through the interest. They can actually treat the finance charges as a case cost itself, or they could just pay the interest themselves. Either way, it addresses that phantom income issue that so many lawyers face and creates law firm liquidity, which we know is going to be so important over the next 12, 24, 36 months. So, Sean, we're bumping up on the hour. I just want your take on that.
Yeah, I think that you touched upon the important aspects of it, Ari, and that is, reach out to your banker, reach out to Esquire Bank, reach out to your accountant. A lot of people feel as though because it has always been done that way, that is the way that it needs to continue to be done. And I know, especially around here, that's a good way to get me pissed off, to tell me that it's always been done this way. You've got to do things the way that it is going to be best serving your business, and and that can be done ethically and in the best interest of your client. And clearly, all of this can be. So,
yeah, and I just want to mention, because we have lawyers from literally all over the country participating and observing today, and each state has its own ethics opinion that addresses this, and then suggested language that goes into a sample retainer agreement if lawyers want to take advantage of that opportunity. So I just want to make sure the audience knows that that's information that's readily available to you if you are interested. So it's 3:00 on the nose. I want to thank everybody for joining. Let me just quickly go around the horn for any last thoughts or closing statements. Michael?
I have nothing. Thanks for inviting me to the session, and good luck.
Appreciate it. Lou?
Yeah, pleasure to be here. There's a lot out there. If I could be a source of clarity, I encourage you to reach out, email, text, phone, whatever. I try to be as responsive as possible. And unlike attorney, there's no meter next to my phone. You're not going to get a surprise bill. We're here to be a resource. So, feel free to.
Everyone, stick around. We're going to put up everyone's contact information in a second, right after Sean's closing remarks. Sean.
I take the comment to heart, Mr. Pezzoleo. I've never sent a client a bill for my time, and I never will. I appreciate the time and the great questions today. I hope that everybody that needs me can reach out. My contact information is right there on the screen. How perfect. Please use me as a resource if there's anything I can do. And certainly any of the wonderful speakers that were here with us today. I thank you for your time, and keep your dukes up.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe. Really appreciate you attending today.